The second panel will focus on the atrocities committed against the Ukrainian children. And the final panel will document the horror of this conflict and the crimes against humanity committed by the Russian Federation and their leadership. This will include testimony about the violations of human rights of the indigenous Tatar community in occupied Crimea. So with that, please welcome the address by video of the First Lady of Ukraine, Her Excellency Ms. Zelenska.
Вітаю. Нас зібрала нині важлива тема. Можливо, найважливіша із тем. Вона сформульована як порушення прав людини в Україні. Однак я розповім, чому вона стосується не тільки України.
However, I will tell you why it's not only concerns Ukraine, but other people as well. Let's just look first how it looks like violation of human rights, not in paper, but in reality. Everyday reality in Ukraine after the Russian invasion. I want to show you the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, the center of our salt industry. This is how Bakhmut used to be, and this is what it is after many months of assaults of Russians against the city. There were 80,000 people living in the city. Now only 5,000 remains, among them 150 children. Every day these people go for humanitarian aid and water under heavy shelling, and they die every day. They are evacuated by special services and volunteers selflessly, and the evacuations are dangerous. Not so far ago, an American volunteer was killed because the ambulance he worked on was shot at. One little boy was evacuated when his parents were killed by the shelling, and then the police had to come up with a special rescue operation to save the boy. What are we, people in this audience and the cities have in common, and with the boy and the volunteers? These are human rights. In any city of Ukraine, in London, Berlin, or New York, we have the right to live free, not to be killed or tortured, the right not to be blown to pieces by a Russian missile. Each of us has this right, and you know that. But the right of these people in the photo, whether dead or still alive, has been violated by Russia. Another human rights violation looks like this. This is the building in the city of Dmytro that was hit by the Russian missile a month ago. Whole families died there, more than 50 adults and 6 children. And this is what it looks like in occupied Mariupol, where the Russians recently demolished the ruins of their destroyed theaters that they bombed by themselves together with people in spring. And this is what Mariupol looks like today, that city. A terrible monument to human rights in all their diversity destroyed by Russia. And this is what human rights violations look like in deoccupied Izum when it was liberated by the armed forces of Ukraine. Mass graves of Ukrainians left behind by the Russians, just like that before in Bucha and Irpin. This is what human rights looks like in Vinnytsia when the rocket hit in the middle of the city, 20 people in the offices and in the parking lot. There were 3 children among them during a routine visit to the doctor. This is what a human rights violation looked like at the Kramatorsk train station when a Russian missile killed 50 people who were trying to evacuate. And in Kremenchuk, when dozens of people burned alive by the shelling of a shopping mall, and in Kyiv downtown, where a Russian missile buried not only human rights under the rubble, but also a young couple who were expecting their first child. And you can see the human rights violations yourself when you see the displaced Ukrainian persons in your country, because they should have the right to be at home whether they want to be with their loved ones. Instead, Russia has deprived 6 million Ukrainians of their homes, and 8 million more became displaced within their own country. And there are also human rights violations that I cannot show you in the photos because the victims have a hard time talking about them. At least at the moment, we have about 150 rapes that are documented by the prosecutors that were committed by the Russian invaders in Ukraine. These are only cases when victims found strength to testify, because this is still a stigmatized crime. I also wanted to show you photos of 16,000 Ukrainian children that were kidnapped, were abducted and taken to Russia. Their right to childhood, to family, to their language, to their nationality was violated. From what we know, they're being given to the Russian families, and they're trying to erase their memory about their origin. And I think you will agree that regardless of our country or nationality, we have the right not to be killed in our own homes. However, Ukrainians are being killed in front of the whole world for the whole year, in their own cities, villages, apartments, hospitals, theaters. And that is why we apply another inalienated human right, the right to self-defense. However, we need to understand when the rights of one person are violated, the rights of all others are violated.
Однієї країни
of one country is violated, it's also the try to violate rights of citizens in the other country. If genocide of one country is committed, no nation can live in peace. The key word here is genocide. Human rights are like air. They have no borders. Either we all have them or we don't have them at all. Therefore, when Russia shells Ukraine, takes nuclear power plants as a hostage, threatens with nuclear weapons, it is the attack on very principle of human rights, the one that the world documented in the Convention on Human Rights more than 70 years ago. That's why we say that this year we are not just fighting against the aggressor, we are fighting for human rights common for the people in Bakhmut, Dnipro, Kyiv, Mariupol, and to everyone who is in this room or has joined us online. We are fighting for what unites us, the right to freedom, life, not to be tortured, and to live freely. Ukraine's victory will mean the victory of human rights over lawlessness, torture, and destruction. Therefore, justice for Ukraine is a justice for the entire world. That's why we call on the United Nations to establish a special tribunal for the crimes of Russian aggression. It is not only us who need that. We need that for everyone, so it never will be repeated again. No one will have to suffer that. We are talking these days about different fronts. The real front, when we fight with the arms, the economic front, where we fight with sanctions. I'm calling on you to create a legal front, a front of justice. It is needed to save succeeding generations from this scourge of war and reaffirm faith and fundamental rights of people, the dignity wars of the humans, equal rights of men and women. And these are not my words. It's a quote from the United Nations Charter, signed on June 26, 1945, after another terrible war ended. But they do sound so relevant today. Let's listen to them. Let's finally listen to them. Thank you.
Powerful words to start us off today. Now we will hear from His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Mr. Kuleba. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm grateful to 45 countries that helped make this event happen, as well as to everyone who joined us in person or online today. This event is a wake-up call. It is our call for everyone to work together to save people's lives and protect their rights and freedoms, no matter where they are, in Russian captivity, being deported, or stuck in temporarily occupied parts of Ukraine. Russia's full-scale invasion of my country caused the worst human crisis in Europe since World War II. Russia has committed all kinds of crimes against the Ukrainian people for the past 9 years, violating every bit of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Forcible deportation, filtration camps, arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, torture, summary executions, conflict-related sexual violence, attacks on civilians, and critical infrastructure with missiles and drones. This is not a full list of crimes against humanity and war crimes committed by the Russian Federation. Thousands of Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians remain in deplorable conditions in illegal detention on Ukraine's temporarily occupied territories or in Russia. But the most deplorable crime is the forcible transfers and deportations of Ukrainian children to Russia, away from their families.
Office, please turn on your camera.
And caregivers. Hundreds of
We
orphans.
are broadcasting you into the meeting. Can you please turn on your camera? Thank you.
I would be happy to if you show me the button I have to push. Okay, I hope it worked, whoever you are. Hundreds of orphans and children without parental care were given to Russian families and for adoption, and this is what First Lady of Ukraine has just spoke about. 16,000. A recent report by Yale School of Public Health Humanitarian Research Lab uncovers a petrifying system of camps and facilities used by Russia to deport Ukrainian children with the aim of making Russians out of them. According to the report's findings, this network includes at least 43 facilities that stretch from one end of Russia to the other. 32 of them are used for so-called political re-education, and all levels of Russian government are involved in this genocide. This horror must stop, and those responsible must be held fully accountable. To stop it and punish perpetrators, we all need to join forces. Governments, international community, international organizations, NGOs, activists, media, experts, and of course, legal community. Ladies and gentlemen, we must not forget that Russian aggression against Ukraine started 9 years ago, in February 2014, when Russia invaded Crimea. Failure to respond decisively to this breach of the international order paved the way for what is now the largest international armed conflict in Europe since World War II. Unpunished evil returns on a bigger scale. The reason behind Russian crimes during these 9 years boils down to one word: impunity. Russia felt it could get away with all of this. Therefore, the cure against Russian crimes boils down to one word too, and this word is justice. We therefore support the investigation by the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and are grateful to Prosecutor Hunt and his team's efforts. We are fully committed to continuing to work together with the ICC in the fight against impunity. We look forward to seeing the deliverables of the ICC investigation, in particular indictments and arrest warrants for those Russians who committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Accountability for core international crimes committed in Ukraine shall be comprehensive. There shall be no gaps or loopholes in it. Russia's political and military leadership must face justice too. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a crime in and of itself, a flagrant violation of the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force against territorial integrity of states. International criminal justice has important achievements in addressing genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. But there is no international court or tribunal which can exercise jurisdiction over the crime of aggression against Ukraine. We must close this accountability gap and establish a special tribunal which will be able to do that. The crime obviously happened. The Russian invasion of Ukraine will go down in history as a textbook example of the crime of aggression. We cannot let it go unpunished. This would cause enormous damage to the international legal order and the rule of law. This is why it is so important to establish a special tribunal. Aggression is the mother of all crimes, meaning that all war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide stem from it. Together with our friends and partners, we gathered a core group on the establishment of the special tribunal. The group will play a leading role and become an ultimate platform for holding legal discussions, finding solutions, and paving the way forward. I therefore encourage you to join the core group and make your contribution to the establishment of the special tribunal. As of now, an international center for the prosecution of the crime of aggression in Ukraine will be established in The Hague, with the objective to coordinate investigation, preserve and store evidence for future trials. And we are grateful to our colleagues from the European Union and of course the Netherlands for this move. We look forward to the rapid establishment and beginning of operations of this center. This is an important step forward to ensuring accountability for the crime of aggression. Ukrainians hear the powerful voices of the entire democratic world in our support, which should be strengthened by resolute, coordinated actions. And I'm confident that our dialogue today will contribute to the creation of new effective initiatives and formats of cooperation on human rights protection and accountability. There is obviously no one-size-fits-all approach to all situations, and many existing recipes no longer work. It is high time to introduce new approaches and tools, and we shouldn't be afraid of it. Let's do it together and prove that everything that seems impossible is ultimately possible when justice is our goal. Thank you.
We will now hear from the Foreign Minister Hoekstra of the Netherlands. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and ladies and gentlemen, I cannot get the image out of my head. The conversation I had with Sasha, a 12-year-old boy who has seen more misery in his life than we probably ever see in ours. He told me how his eye had been injured during a Russian missile attack, and how he had been captured by Russian forces, separated from his mother, and told that he had been adopted by Russians because he had no parents. And it was only thanks to the perseverance of his grandmother that he was able to escape the dark fate that had befallen on thousands of Ukrainian children. And I have to say that it truly grieves me how these children are being ripped away from their families, their culture, and their heritage. And how Russia is actually trying to eradicate the Ukrainian identity by targeting the most vulnerable. Ladies and gentlemen, 1 year after Russia began its unworded, unprovoked and illegal war in Ukraine, the crimes are simply piling up. Child abductions, sexual violence and torture. The shelling of schools, hospitals and houses, and the destruction of basically entire neighborhoods. This has to stop. And yes, eventually we all want peace, but the only way to bring about peace is by not tolerating this aggression. And as we look ahead towards a future peace, we must also look back to the flagrant violations of international law, atrocities we simply cannot ignore. And that is why the Netherlands is taking a leading role in ensuring justice is being done for the people of Ukraine, in line with President Zelensky's peace formula. We are working to achieve full accountability for international crimes committed in Ukraine. Accountability that puts survivors' needs front and center, with a watertight judicial process that ensures that Russia doesn't get away with such crimes. And it is to this end we're supporting the quest for accountability. We're doing this bilaterally with Ukraine, via international coordination and investigative mechanisms, and of course via the ICC. And for this quest to succeed, we also need watertight evidence. And that is why the Netherlands is sending another 2 forensic investigation missions to Ukraine. And I would like to invite all state parties to the Rome Statute present here today to contribute to this effort and basically to do the same. As I've said, nobody should get away with crimes like these. And therefore, we strongly support the establishment of the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression. This center, to be located in The Hague, will collect evidence that can be used to eventually try Russian leadership. And the Netherlands will host a register of damage claims arising from Russia's aggression. And we will soon be launching a dialogue group to facilitate the coordination of accountability initiatives together with Ukraine, the EU and the ICC. And here as well, I would like to invite all of you to join and support these accountability initiatives. Dear friends, we must do all we can to prevent further injustice. And by doing everything in our power to return children like Sasha to their country, to their parents, and to their loved ones. And that is why the Netherlands joined forces with Ukraine and Germany to make sure the world knows that Russia is systematically abducting Ukrainian children. And why we firmly support the new sanctions that the EU is planning. And I would urge everyone in this room today to join us in condemning these appalling crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, Sasha's grandmother traveled through Poland, Lithuania, Latvia and Russia, and then into Russian-occupied eastern Ukraine to get her grandson back. And she succeeded because she refused to give up. The Ukrainian people are still standing because they refuse to give up. And we must help them with the same resolve. And we must do so not only for the people of Ukraine, but for the future of all of us. Because the core values that bring us together here today of the United Nations are at stake. There can never be peace. And I say that again, there can never be peace in a world where crime and brute force prevail over justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Now we will hear from Foreign Minister Rainsula from Estonia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Excellencies, guests, dear Dmytro, I deliver the statement on behalf of the group of Friends of Accountability following the aggression against Ukraine, consisting of 49 member states and the European Union. In one horrendous year, Russia's war of aggression has caused intolerable misery, innocent deaths and destruction of Ukraine. Reportedly, over 1.6 million Ukrainians have been forcibly taken to Russia. We have witnessed images and reports of indiscriminate killings of civilians, as well as unlawful attacks on civilian infrastructure, sexual and gender-based violence, and shocking reports of abductions of children. Such actions are unacceptable and constitute a violation of international law, wherever they occur, and must be met with the same strong response whenever they occur. Today, we will have the opportunity to hear first-hand testimonies from survivors and experts. In the eyes of the public, the credibility of our institutions, including the UN, rests upon our collective response. To ensure that all perpetrators are held to full account for the egregious violations of international law still playing out before us, and to defend the rights of victims and survivors. Reports of conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine, targeted most frequently at women and girls, are of particular concern. Conflict-related sexual violence, including rape used as a tactic of war, is a blatant violation and abuse of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and it can constitute a war crime and crimes against humanity. It must be met with effective accountability measures. In this regard, We welcome the cooperation between the government of Ukraine and the Office of the Special Representative for Sexual Violence in Conflict, and we commend the important work of civil society organizations. We are also deeply concerned by reports of Russian forces having relocated at least 6,000 Ukrainian children to camps and facilities across Russia for forced adoption and military training. Such actions are in clear violation of international humanitarian law and international human rights law and may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. We must continue to defend the human rights of every child, and we welcome today's discussion on this particular issue. Fighting impunity must be at the core of our international response. We commend all efforts to ensure accountability, in particular the opening of an investigation by the prosecutor of the ICC. Additionally, the establishment of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, the OSCE Moscow mechanism, what an irony of name, the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission, and the creation of an international center for the prosecution of the crime of aggression are important contributions to the quest for justice. The group of friends also highlights the important efforts of all other actors who contribute to accountability efforts for Ukraine, including national investigators and civil society actors collecting and preserving evidence. While we wait for the ongoing legal processes, which will take time, we cannot ignore the independent reports and testimonies we have in front of us. Ukrainian authorities have prosecuted and tried more than 20 people for war crimes. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine has found reasonable grounds to conclude that an array of war crimes and violations of human rights and international humanitarian law have been committed in Ukraine. The experts of the OSCE Moscow mechanism concluded that international humanitarian law and international human rights law has been extensively violated in the conflict in Ukraine. The mission also concluded that some of these violations were likely to amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The OHCHR monitoring mission has documented violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law, such as unlawful killings, including summary executions of civilians in more than 30 settlements in Kyiv, Chernihiv, Kharkiv and Sumy region. The numbers from the latest report published yesterday are devastating, highlighting that the human cost of the war in Ukraine has left at least 8,000 civilians dead and more than 13,000 injured over the past 12 months. Today we will hear first-hand testimonies that the international community can't ignore. We need to continue to call out violations and condemn what is taking place. We recall the order on provisional measures by the International Court of Justice of 16th March last year that Russia shall immediately suspend the military operations that it commenced on 24 February last year in the territory of Ukraine. The principal judicial organ of the United Nations has stated it clearly. We call on Russia to comply, to stop the war. We, as the international community, must show that we will not tolerate any country trampling on the UN Charter. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now we will give the floor to Foreign Minister Flores of Guatemala. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Harper, for giving me the floor. Victory for human rights, justice for Ukraine, and accountability. That is the reason that we are here, dear friends and excellencies. This is the moment that we need to strongly condemn the unjustified and unprovoked aggression by the Russian Federation against the territorial integrity and the population of Ukraine. These actions constitute a flagrant violation of the United States Nations Charter. We are extremely concerned what is happening today, but we represent the voice of the ones that doesn't have a voice today. The numbers that we're going to hear today can be not tolerated. It is admissible and we should reprehend it. For the reason that we are here together to prevail on peace, the UN General Assembly has recognized that Russia must be held accountable for the violations of the international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights. We are going to appeal today to all of you that we can come together with conclusions that can be able to allow us to bring Russia accountable for what is happening. We are very concerned about the increase of the numbers that we have of people that need human aid and rights that we need to be able to provide. Throughout this year, the intensive hostilities by Russia has caused destruction, deaths, and grievances to the civilians, and including women and children, forced to evacuate their homes. As a result, Ukrainians are without access to food, drinking water, medical assistance, and basic services. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is extremely alarming that Russian military operations has not ceased, including the increase of launchings of different types of missiles against civilian population, frankly violating the international law, international humanitarian law, including threats of a possible use of nuclear weapons. The President of the Republic of Guatemala, Dr. Alejandro Yamatei Fay, and myself witnessed firsthand the atrocities caused by this aggression. During our visit to Ukraine last year, the scene was devastating. That is why today I call to the international community that we need to be able to work together to achieve peace and make the necessary commitments to prevent the armed clashes between the nations through dialogue, negotiation, and peace means provided by the international law. As a result, my country, Guatemala, co-facilitated the resolution adopted last 14th of November that requested the creation of an international register of damages against Ukraine. Guatemala also co-sponsored the resolution 49-1 of the Human Rights Council, which established the International Independent Commission of Inquiry to investigate the violation stemming from the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We have also supported all initiatives to seek the creation of a special tribunal for the crimes committed of this aggression. At this time, we need to raise the voice to end this conflict. Guatemala joins the call for a ceasefire to the end hostilities against civilians in Ukraine. Guatemala, as a state that respectfully continue to respect international law and is very proud of the peace vocation that we have, calls for diplomacy to be able to be prevented and integrated. Today, raise the voice for the ones that are needed. And the voices is theirs. No more life needs to be lost. No more civilians needs to be wounded. No more mothers needs to be able to suffer for the loss of their children. Accountability, victory for human rights is needed. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Now we will turn the floor over to the Minister Jolly of Canada, Foreign Minister of Canada. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Harper. Thank you for this opportunity to join all of you and my friend, Dmytro, Minister Kuleba, and other ministers at this essential event to hear firsthand accounts of some of the consequences of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Il y a un an, une invasion à grande échelle d'un voisin souverain semblait inimaginable, mais pour les Ukrainiens, c'est devenu leur réalité. Today, Ukrainians are not only defending their country from the evil of Putin and his enablers. They are defending their rights, the principles of the UN Charter, and the values of freedom and democracy that so many of us hold dear. There's no option but victory for Ukraine. Canada will be there to support Ukraine's fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And once they win, we will help them to recover. Last week, I was in Ukraine to reaffirm just that. I met with courageous and resilient Ukrainians from all walks of life who are passionate about rebuilding Ukraine once they are victorious. In our conversation, it was clear, for reconstruction to be inclusive and enduring, it must address both the physical and invisible impacts of Putin's war on men, women, and children, victims of the war. And so we must tackle the psychological marks of the war with the same seriousness and urgency as the physical scars. To heal the trauma that has been inflicted on the population, we must support survivors in seeking justice. This pursuit of accountability will be essential to achieving lasting peace in Ukraine. The efforts Ukrainians are making to provide relief to their fellow citizens, even as the war rages, is inspiring in a world awash in too much suffering. It drove home for me the need for the international community, of all of us, to continue helping Ukraine. Let me be clear. Russia's war on Ukraine is unjustifiable. It is illegal. Russian forces have committed and continue to commit indiscriminate and appalling acts across Ukraine. They have destroyed entire cities, targeted hospitals and playgrounds. In an act of incredible horror, they have ripped children away from their homes. They have taken the lives of too many families. In Ukraine, I met with the Prosecutor General to discuss his work to gather evidence and prosecute those responsible for crimes linked to the war, including conflict-related sexual violence. He is dealing, as we speak, with some 60,000 cases, and this number climbs with each passing day. The details included in each are horrific. Yet those figures do not provide a full picture of the widespread human suffering occurring each of the 363 days of Putin's war. For every individual who is willing to tell their story, many others go unreported due to the stigma and feelings of shame, as mentioned by First Lady Zelenska a bit earlier. And I also met with Ukrainian police officers, psychologists, prosecutors, and investigators who are working to investigate and prosecute these crimes while supporting survivors of this violence. And Canada will continue to support them. Those responsible for this suffering will answer for their crimes. They will be met with the full force of the law. Canada welcomes Ukraine's case against Russia at the International Court of Justice, and we continue to support the International Criminal Court's efforts in Ukraine. We have also joined the core group launched by Ukraine, my friend Dmytro, in examining the proposal to establish a special tribunal on the crime of aggression, a crime which may not fall within the scope of existing institutions. Together, we will leave no stone unturned as we identify the most effective ways to hold Russia accountable for its crime of aggression. This is also aimed at deterring others who are watching us, considering if they could ever challenge the rules. The emergency session of the General Assembly will meet today and vote tomorrow on a resolution on UN Charter principles underlying a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Je sais que les Ukrainiens comptent sur le soutien de la communauté internationale pour les aider à parvenir à la paix. And Canada calls on all member states to support the resolution and, through it, to continue supporting the principles of the UN Charter and the people of Ukraine. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Your Excellency. As each of our distinguished ministers have noted, what is essential is accountability. And so one piece of that accountability is the International Criminal Court, and we welcome online the Honorable Karim Khan, King's Counsel and prosecutor at the ICC.
Distinguished foreign ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it's
really a somber moment, and it's an awful and unwanted necessity to be assembled together today. As has been said by the distinguished speakers already, as is known in the world that have seen the pictures, that have heard the voices, terrible trauma and suffering has been occasioned to Ukraine and her people over the last 1 year. In May of last year, I was in Bucha, outside St. Peter's Church, with the then Prosecutor General, with my team, and with the Ukrainian investigators that were working with courage to document the crimes that appeared to have been committed. I saw the body bags, and we heard the reports. And in the subsequent months, the investigations conducted by my office have deepened. In Borodyanka, in Kharkiv, and when I left, I thought really about left behind because shells were falling. I left Kharkiv, my small team, and we went to Kyiv, but Ukrainian investigators and prosecutors remained in a city that was on the front line, and this is repeated across Ukraine. I said very clearly in Bucha that unfortunately and objectively, Ukraine was a crime scene. And the accounts that we have seen fortify the conclusion that manifestly, ever more vividly, we are certain that there are reasonable grounds to that Rome Statute crimes appear to have been committed in Ukraine. We've seen, and it's been mentioned by the First Lady of Ukraine and others, we've seen the pictures of the injured regarding the maternity ward in Mariupol or the theater. We've seen and heard accounts of the targeting of the grids. We've seen and heard allegations of prisoners of war that are recounting allegations of torture. We have heard and spoken to individuals who are complaining of sexual and gender-based violence. We have seen and heard the predicament of so many children who appear to have been taken across international borders. And our joint responsibility is to make sure the law is on the front lines. It is not an optional extra. It is not something that we come to with a degree of pedestrian approach. We need to act with dispatch while the bullets are being fired and as bombs are falling, because I have seen, either on the border of Poland, when grandmothers and women and children crossed the border early on, at the end of February and beginning of March, that the law matters to individuals. Whilst many have lost their physical shelter, they are looking increasingly to the law to give them shelter now for what they've endured and to mitigate or ameliorate the worst types of excesses that far too often take place in conflict. And therefore, the seriousness of the situation from any perspective is well known to everybody. And yet in the despair of uncertainty, we have also seen numerous times courage, indefatigable energy, and determination to survive, to prosper, and to succeed. There is a saying, of course, that the darkest part of the night is just before the dawn. And God alone knows whether or not we have seen the worst, but we pray so. But in the midst of the disruption, the uncertainty, when the anchors of stability seem to have been uprooted in so many places around the world, we do see rays of hope. In an unprecedented move within 48 hours of my invitation, 39 states spoke with one voice from all corners of the world that the situation in Ukraine should be referred to my office. We now have 43 states. We have seen new partnerships being built. The Foreign Minister of the Netherlands, Wopke Hoekstra, has to be applauded, as does the government of the Netherlands, in pioneering with my office a unique, novel, rotational model for forensic experts to go under the of the ICC to help document crime scenes, to collect evidence to the highest international standards, to help the Ukrainian national authorities, and also to provide evidence to my office in a way that will facilitate independent and impartial investigation. Since May of last year, we've had a continuous field presence in Ukraine. We've partnered also with, for the first time in the history of the office, with a joint investigative team, 7 states now under the auspices of Europe. And we've also tried to build new bridges, realizing that there's no space for disinterest. There's no space for spectators in this battle conscience of humanity, this imperative that the law is rendered effective in this critical moment of world affairs. It's something, for many reasons, has to transcend Ukraine and galvanize us all to do better when it comes to adherence of law. And so we've also partnered with the Genocide Network and also Eurojust to produce civil society guidelines to make sure that those brave and enthusiastic documenters can also be given some guidance, facilitate their work to document as first responders and also refer matters to the national prosecution agencies and the office. So in the darkness of the hour, we do have these rays of hope. And the lesson that does need to be understood by all of us as students, all of us with is that the law must be seen to be potent. So this moment is a moment of opportunity, but for us to deliver on that, I would also, with respect, echo wise words, if I may say so, of the First Lady of Ukraine. And she said a few minutes that human rights, like the air, have no border. It's really important. And the prosecutor of the ICC is not any state or any government, and is not against any state or any government. The prosecutor of the ICC must be to be a friend of humanity and a servant of justice. And the simple truth of the matter is, we need to use this moment also to make sure that the concerns that are here in various parts of the world, particularly the global south, are addressed, and we use this moment to give rise to any arguments of exceptionalism or of selectivity. And well before the situation in Ukraine really went over the tipping point in February the 24th of last year, that was the most recent, of course, aggression. I said on the 16th of June 2021, a year and a half ago, when I was sworn in, that I'm not in the export business. I'm not selling a product to states. That the Rome Statute that I've sworn to uphold and apply independently and impartially is not the law of Italy. The Geneva Conventions are not the law of Switzerland. And I said that for a reason. I continued that this law that we apply is not the property of the global north, any more so than it is of the global south. It unites people because it is the lost property of humanity. The Islamic world and the Christendom. You look at the Talmud, you look at the teachings of Confucius or Buddha. In all countries, in all cultures, in all nations, in all people, resonate or find voice in fundamental principles of humanity that bind us together. And I think this realization that who is a friend for justice and who is an enemy to those that would commit genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes anywhere in the world, provide this or constitute a singular moment for us to come together and do better across the world. We've tried to show that dynamism in a number of situations. In Libya last year, we applied for new warrants. We've tried to increase our field presence, not only in Kyiv, or in Cox's Bazar, or in Caracas and in other parts of the world. We're trying to move forward with confirmation hearings in Joseph Kony case, to move forward. And if we seize this moment of opportunity, if we realize with greater acuteness, the law is not something that can be taken and left. It's not part of an a la carte menu that we can choose what we want. This dark moment, this moment of uncertainty for Ukraine, can be a moment for us to together as humanity and show the victims, the survivors, the very courageous people that are going to speak in a moment, that from Kyiv to Cox's Bazar, from Kharkiv to Khartoum, international justice is on their side. And if we do that, perhaps we can move more positively in a better direction to make finally, once and for all, in the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we deliver on the promise of never again and the prayer of a world with more justice and less crime. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Khan, for those powerful remarks. I just want to close this session by thanking our distinguished ministers for their insightful, sobering, and important observations. Given the time, I'll just close by saying this. I want to recall what this building is all about.
Where is the Secretary General?
This building is about
The violation of the UN Charter.
this building is about the international rules-based order and upholding it. And Russia's aggression has been the most glaring vitiation of that of the UN Charter and of what this manifestation, this institutional manifestation, is all about. And so, as every one of our distinguished ministers has observed, accountability is essential. Staying steadfast in our resolution to end this conflict and to bring accountability is our mission. So with that, I will close this panel. Thank you all for your remarks.